Thank you for taking the time to watch this episode of Life Support. If you enjoy the content, we would ask that you like it, hit subscribe, and share it with your friends. Hey, I am so glad to have you on Life Support. What we do on this program is we tell stories, and we deal with some topics that maybe other shows don't. But what we want to do is highlight Jesus and his redemptive work in our lives, and I hope that you'll be encouraged today. I have a wonderful guest. Matt Moeller has joined us, and he has quite the story to tell. Matt, thanks a lot for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you, and you do have quite a story to tell. Just some of our dialogue before we even went on the air here was really interesting, but your story starts quite a while ago.
Yeah.
And just tell me how all of this kind of you're involved with some really good ministry now. Tell me your story and how it kind of all led up to where you are right now.
For sure. So I'm from Minnesota, born and raised, grew up in central Minnesota. And really, growing up, really involved in sports, kind of really big part of my story growing up, middle school and into high school. And one of the changing points in my life was ninth grade, sustained a knee injury playing football and had to quit playing sports. I was on crutches for 6 months, and from that point, it was kind of prescribed painkillers at that time, and started taking those for recreational drug use, and just kind of went into the spiral. At that same time, all my identity was built and found in playing sports, and all these friends I had played football and baseball and basketball. And so when I was taken out of that, I lost those friends. I started to lose those connections. I started to build these bonds in other areas, and it was with friends that were partying and drinking, and that's it. That's what we did. So I kind of fell into that, into ninth grade and 10th grade, and in 11th grade, got a friend of mine. He made an offhanded comment one day and said, I really wish my dad was dead. And to me, should have been red flags there. But my identity was so wrapped up in this group of friends and what are they going to think of me, and how am I going to be a person that can be. I wanted to be the cool guy. I want to be the guy who can get everything for everyone and do anything for anyone. And so, he kind of talked about this, and he asked me if I could get him a gun, and I just absolutely, hey, yeah, I can get you a gun. And it kind of just went into this place where, that friendship that we had became about this. And this friend of mine had, kind of talked me into that, getting him a weapon, getting him a gun, and he used that to kill his dad. Wow. So I was 17 years old at the time, and he had asked other people to get him a weapon and stuff. So when the police did their investigation, it was pretty, apparent what had happened. So we were both arrested, and I was charged with first and second degree murder, and pled guilty to second degree murder, dropped the first degree murder, and ended up getting a 30-year prison sentence. So, and in Minnesota, you get 30-year prison sentence. You have to do 2/3 of that in a state facility. So I got. I had spent 20 years in the
So you were 17 when all this
17
happened.
When all of that happened, yeah.
So you must have, at that point, wondered, like, where's my life headed here? Or is my life even over? Is it worth living?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was one of those things where, like, it was so hard to process what was even happening. I mean, these numbers were just so huge. I was just at that point, like, just living one day in front of, because I was in jail during this whole time, and I hadn't been in trouble before as a kid, so I wasn't like, I didn't have a background in going to juvenile detention.
Yeah, you hadn't been in Red Wing and
right. I hadn't been through that,
places,
so it was all new. So for me, I'm just trying to survive day to day. But it was in the county jail pretty soon after I was arrested. About a week after I was arrested, I was in the county jail, and I remember I'm sitting there in the jail pod, and all these guys started lining up at the door, and I had asked them, hey, where are you guys going? What are you lining up for? And one of the guys says, we're going to church. You want to come with? And I said, no, I don't want to go with. I didn't, go to church. I had didn't have a great faith as a kid growing up. My family wasn't, we went on Christmas and Easter, and that's kind of about it, And And so I said no, and one of the guys goes, well, they give us free donuts if you go to church. So I just said, okay, well, I can go then for free donuts.
It still works even today.
Still works today. So I went down to the church service, and we did a couple songs in that, and then it was this volunteer was an older couple, and when the man who was the volunteer started to preach, and I just remember, I don't remember exactly what was preached. I don't remember the whole message, but I do remember him referencing John chapter 1 and saying, when the light shines in the darkness does not overcome it. And that stuck with me because I was in a dark place. And he was talking about the forgiveness of Christ and the love of Christ and all these things that I hadn't really heard preached in that way. So at the end, he did an altar call, said, who wants to give their hearts to the Lord? And I raised my hand. And, I had no idea what that meant. And I was led through a prayer, and I kind of said this, and I felt that. I felt that, kind of that Holy Spirit moment of like, hey, what I'm doing here is kind of a life-changing thing. Mm-hmm. Now, from that point, I would love to be the person to sit here and tell you, like, from that point on, every single thing was different. Well, that wasn't true. I know I felt the Holy Spirit with me and God with me, and I was started to read the Bible and learn more, but I was still dealing with, the guilt and really a lot of shame and, hurt over what I have done to my family, what I had, done to the victim of this crime and just everything that happened.
Yeah, you've gone from the big athlete on campus to here you are now in jail.
Right.
For a long time.
Yeah, for sure. And so I dealt with that. And so then I was sentenced and went into prison and kind of just in that same mode. And I would go to church programs, I would kind of go to Bible studies, but it was like years of just kind of dealing with that, what was going on in my heart and this guilt and shame. About the time that I went into prison, so this is 2003 when I had gone into prison. I had turned 18 in the county jail, so I was 18 went into prison, and a friend of my family named Bill reached out. He had known my grandma kind of in a working relationship. Bill owned some billboard companies, and my grandmother worked for the county, so they had kind of this working, relationship over this stuff, and so it happened that on the day I was sentenced, Bill had to call my grandma for some work stuff, and my grandma he heard in my voice, or heard in her voice, everything was not great. And Bill said, what's going on? And my grandma said, my grandson just got sentenced to all this time in prison, and it's just been really tough. And Bill said, well, can I send him a Bible? And my grandma said, yeah, here's his address. And so Bill sent me a Bible. I sent him a thank you card, and then he said, can I come visit you? So then he got onto my visiting list. And Bill is just this great Christian man. I mean, just an amazing person, and poured into me, even when I'm going through and facing all that still, Bill was coming up to visit. He would come with my grandparents, he would come by himself, and sometimes we'd read the Bible together, sometimes we'd pray together, sometimes we'd just talk about sports. But, Bill was kind of this great mentor to me, and really taught me what it was to, like, see the love of Christ. And it was Bill, and then the volunteers that came into prison who volunteered with church ministries that gave so much of themselves we had retreat weekends, or, they would come every week to put on our programs, and I saw the love of Christ in them. And
so those things make a difference.
Oh, man, they make a difference. They make a difference in the lives of, I was pretty fortunate that I had good family support and remain to have good family support to this day, but I had great family support while I was in prison. But, I know guys who were in prison, and that was their visits. Like that, the church volunteers who come in to put on the programs were their connection to the outside world. And and I felt that, that connection. And I think kind of the final piece for me is, after about 10 years and I had Bill kind of come alongside me, and that was really good. But when I got into Stillwater Prison, and this was after I was in prison for about 10 years, and I started to get around these guys who were lifers, single life, double life, triple life, guys who were more time than me. These were guys that were in prison before me. They were getting out of prison after me. Yeah. And I would look and I'd be like, man, these guys have so much joy, and they have smiles on their face, and they're doing their time with purpose. And I wanted to know why, and started to realize that it was the love of Christ, that the love of Christ had changed their heart in a real and tangible way. Right. And so I started to watch them, and I started to hang out with them, and I started to learn from them. And one of my good friends who was there when I had come up for reclassification. I got to go to a medium security prison, and it's kind of going to be these next steps in my time. And he really encouraged me, hey, you should sign up for this program put on by Prison Fellowship. It was called Interchange Freedom Initiative at the time. It's called Prison Fellowship Academy now. And I signed up for that, and that's a year-long biblically based program. Got involved in that. Stayed on for a year after that as a mentor, and it was during that kind of 2-year time that I really, the Lord just lit a fire in me, and a heart for the lost, and not just for myself, because I feel like some of those, the Holy Spirit did his work to just resolve the heart issues, but just to get the heart for the lost, I gained at that time, and just some other cool connections with Bill. Introduced me to the pastor of his church. And so I started to develop a relationship with the church on the outside of that time with the pastor and with one of the associate pastors, and kind of started to gain that connection during this whole time. So
so God was working this whole time.
Yeah. God was working. When we talk about God working together all things for the good of those, it doesn't mean that all things are going to be good, because that's not true. We're going to have hardship. But those things that go together, whether good or bad or in between, are going to work together into that.
It's interesting. My wife Wendy and I had a chance to speak at Faribault and tell our story, and it was about restorative justice. Yeah. And they literally had the guys who were in for murder in the first 2 rows because of what we were talking about. Yeah. And one of them, who was a life... You call them lifers? I don't know. Yeah. So he came up and goes, I've never had more purpose. He goes, I've never been more excited about what my purpose in life is. And I kind of looked at him like, maybe you just like haven't gotten used to this or something, But he was dead serious. He had gone through some of the things he had gone through. He had found Christ. He was learning. He was growing. Yeah. And it was amazing to me how in that setting God has such power in somebody's life.
Yeah. I think it's, I know for myself in my story that I had gotten to a point. We talk a lot about getting to a point of rock bottom, but I had gotten to a point even more than that, where like I had exhausted all the avenues of doing things myself. And all those avenues run out, and it's only God that's left. So for me, I couldn't help, I guess, but turn to God. And when I did that, and I started to be faithful to what it was that I understood at that point was the call on my life. When I was very early in my faith, I didn't understand it as a call in my life. I just was, it felt right to do these things. Well, I start to realize that God has us purpose for something higher. Yeah. That was huge for me in prison, because here I am with, years left at that point, about a decade left to serve in this. It's like, how am I going to make this part of my life relevant? Because here I'm going to lose my 20s and, part of my 30s. And it's like, so for a while, I really just struggled with like, how are these years of my life going to matter? And I realized that, living for the kingdom here and now was like living above all those circumstances. It didn't matter whether I was in prison, whether I was out of prison. It doesn't matter. I'm going to be serving on mission for God in that place, wherever that place may be. And in that was true freedom. Right. So that was just like a life changer for me.
Which really runs contrary to worldly logic.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because, logically you were right. Like, you have given away your life, but then all of a sudden here's God saying, no, you haven't.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think that like prison is more, and I understand this now, and it is a physical place, obviously, but it is a state of mind, I think, first and foremost. And there's a lot of people who may have never been incarcerated, but in their mind are in prison because of fear or anxiety or whatever these things that are holding us back. And the most amazing thing is that the Bible has the answer to all these things, and God has the answer to all these things. The peace that transcends all understanding is the answer to all of these things. So we gain freedom through surrender, and it's a paradox, and it doesn't make sense, but for me, it worked.
Yeah. So as you got closer and closer to the time of your release, how was God steering you toward what would be next for you?
Yeah. So like I said, during that time in the Prison Fellowship program, really just gained a lot of like really like ministry training at that time, and had the church come alongside me and really help me out with stuff. One of the great opportunities was when I had finished kind of my time there at the Lino Lakes Prison at that the Prison Fellowship Program. I got a chance to go to Moose Lake Prison, which I kind of looked at the time was like one of these moves. So I'm kind of praying to God about like, why? I'm here, I'm in Lino, I'm doing all this really good stuff. We have those ministry opportunities, but it was really, that was the point of being sent. Being up at Moose Lake Prison, Westwood Church was able to come alongside me, and we actually planted what at that time was a micro site within the prison. So Westwood Church was sending their DVD sermon series, and we were watching them on Saturdays, and just very much like an extension of their ministry in prison. And I got to just operate in that right there in Moose Lake while I was there, and it was so cool. And we still, COVID unfortunately kind of put an end to a lot of the things we were doing, but as far as like the sermon notes and kind of some of the things that we send, we still pour into the guys up there at Moose Lake Prison. We get letters at the church from guys up there asking questions that I never knew, to me, which is such a blessing, because it's like this is something that God birthed kind of through the work that we did at that time years ago, and now it's still like carrying on. So so that really just prepared me for what these next steps were. And so in 2022 I began a work release program. It was my final year of the 20 years of incarceration I could spend. It was about 11 months. Lived in a county jail, but got to work in the community. So I went to work every day. And, there was always kind of some thought of me going and working at Westwood Church. I didn't know if it was going to happen or whatever. But in the meantime, I had gotten a job lined up to go work at a car dealership and everything. My cousin was going to get me this job, all this stuff, it was going to be great. And then the day of my release to start work release came, and a COVID outbreak happened at our facility, and that release got canceled, and I actually got it pushed back 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
So then after 2 weeks, I go back to my cousin and say, hey, what's up with this job? He goes, well, no, the job's still there, but the guy who's got to hire you is in Mexico. He's going to be gone. So I had this day open in my schedule on the work release to go look for jobs, and I had called my pastor at Westwood Church, say, hey, can I just come and check out the church? I just want to see it. It's been doing a lot of work, and walking around the church there, and the director of facilities there saw me, and he's like, oh, hey, we talked and introduced, and the pastor there, Joel, had preached about me multiple times. So he's like, oh, we met, and then he goes, well, do you need a job? And I said, well, yeah, as a matter of fact, I do need a job. He goes, well, do you want a job working in the facilities department? So
yeah.
So I started working there, and working as an evening janitor, housekeeper on the facilities team, and did that for about half of my work release time. And about 6 months into doing that, the facility manager at the church transitioned to another church. That job came open, and I was promoted into that role. So now I'm the facility manager at Westwood Church.
Good for you.
That's
and
awesome.
For you who are out of state,
yeah,
it's a big church here in the Twin City area. And that's quite a story, because making that transition when you get out, it's really hard, isn't it, for a lot of people?
Yeah, it is. I think that there's kind of two components to it. So there's a social component and there's a mental component. And I think, one of the things, the social component can be helped by the amount of support an individual has when they get out, from family, from friends, church community, from whoever it is that's supporting them. I had a lot of that. I was blessed. I had great family support.
Right.
So the social stuff, I was able to kind of overcome some barriers. The mental stuff is always going to be there. In prison, I get to make a handful of decisions a day. I mean, when I eat is told to me what I eat.
Yeah.
When all these things, these decisions are made, and it's all of a sudden you're released from that. And it's like there's thousands of decisions to make every day. And that was kind of one of the biggest barriers. Still is a barrier. I mean, I've been out, under a year now. And it's like I still kind of have some of that stuff happens. It comes up where it's hard to make decisions and stuff like this.
Well, that's not a very long time.
Yeah,
I mean, you're really doing well. I have a million questions for you,
Sure.
but in this segment, we're going to have you back. But I have one more question for you, and that is impossible to answer probably. But what's one thing that you learned about God during this experience from the time that you were sentenced to the time now where you're getting your feet underneath you? Is there something that stands out where you just went like, yeah, man, I would have never learned that if I wouldn't have gone through this?
Man, I would think that one of the biggest things and what comes to mind is that there is no situation too big, no thing too bad that God can't work with and through if we allow him and if we give him that, whatever that is. You know, whatever that negative thing is, whatever it is that we look at it as like from the world's standpoint is like this is just an insurmountable hill. If we give that to God and we just say, God, use it, and we go through it and we're faithful, that God's going to use that for his glory. And that's what it is for me, like with prison, with 20 years in prison is, you know, it's not a great, like, obviously, I wish I could go back and change what I did. I wish, you know, that it's a terrible thing. But God is even able to the fact that I can't go back and do that, but God can redeem that and allow me and put me in position, which I have been over and over again, whether it was talking to people in jail or prison, or now that I'm out getting a chance to speak to our high school group and just sharing with them the power of choices, the power of our decisions, and then hopefully helping others to learn from the mistakes that I made. And that's how God kind of redeems that time for me. You know, it could have been 20 years of wasted time in my life, but God redeems that time by giving me the ability to speak about it and hopefully help people.
Well, you are, and that's a pretty special story. And Matt, I really appreciate you sharing it with us. And next time we talk, I really want to dig into the mentorship piece. Yeah, because we don't talk enough about mentorship in churches and how that can change people's lives. But really appreciate you coming by, Matt, and sharing your story.